Welcome to the show where I interview unique individuals representing a variety of neurotypes and conditions. Fun, educational, and ultimately empathetic, this is the Spectrum of Hope. Welcome to the Spectrum of Hope podcast. I'm your host, Logan Tyler Smith, Alaska's autistic auteur. On our podcast today, we have Patrick Reinhart. Patrick, thanks for coming.
Yeah, you're welcome, Logan. Glad to be here.
Great. So, what did you, we were talking off camera about how you retired, but for the purpose of context for viewers at home, what did you do before you retired?
Sure. I had basically a 30-year career as a advocate for people with disabilities. And when I retired, I was the state director of the Governor's Council on Disabilities and Special Education.
Wow. And what did that job entail?
Well, it's basically every state has a council like the Governor's Council on Disabilities and Special Education. Our state council encompasses planning for developmental disability programs, as well as special education programs and programs for infants and toddlers with disabilities.
Wow, sounds like solid work. So that was your job. Have you had any past jobs with people with disabilities before that?
Yep, sure. And yeah, before I did that, I was the director of the State Independent Living Council, which oversees kind of centers for independent living. They're all around the state. And then before that, I was the director of Challenge Alaska, which provided sports and recreation programs for people with disabilities. And the story I'm going to tell you today relates back to the time when I was director of Challenge Alaska.
Wow. Well, please enlighten me. It sounds like a fun story.
Sure. Well, I'm glad to be here with you today on your first podcast, and it's actually the 30-year celebration of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is really the largest in our country. It's been modeled around the world. Other countries have followed suit, but it started over 30 years ago by a group of disability advocates from across the country that wanted to pass this legislation, and were able to do so exactly 30 years ago.
Wow.
So that's what, and I want to talk about actually what was a story leading up to the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act that relates to Alaska.
Great. And is this the story you mentioned off camera involving Justin?
Yeah. Yes. So 31 years ago, I was, I think, 28 years old. Let's see, I have to do the math. Yeah, that's correct. And I was the director of Challenge Alaska down in Anchorage and Girdwood. And Challenge Alaska had a disabled or adaptive ski program for people with disabilities from across the state. And at the time, there was a lot of building going on at Alyeska by new owners that bought the resort. There was basically a big Japanese company bought Alyeska. And we had a small little cabin that we used to operate out of, and because of the building that was going on, we had to get rid of that and find new space. And so I happened to find the perfect spot, I thought, for accessibility purposes to build a new adaptive ski program, and then started to negotiate with the Japanese general managers about getting that space and building a new adaptive ski program. Well, I was having a lot of difficulty at the time, and I'm not sure why, but for whatever reason, they weren't keen on us building at this particular spot. I think they had plans for condos or something like that in the spot. But it was just by chance, I get a call from Justin Dart Jr. one day. And Justin Dart was was the chairperson of the President's Committee on Employment of the Handicapped under George Bush, the senior, and he was basically the chief disability advocate within the administration then. And Mr. Dart called me up one day, and he asked us, if I would be willing to be basically his chauffeur and guide for a trip to Alaska to promote the Americans with Disabilities Act. And he was going around with his wife, Yoshiko, around every state, all 50 states, and advocating for the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And in doing so, he asked me if I'd set up television and radio interviews, public hearings, and get disability advocates together that he could talk with while he was here. And so I was basically for him and his wife around Alaska for 3 days. And so he asked me to do all these things. And of course, I was honored. I knew how big of an advocate he was, and well known, nationally and internationally. And so I was truly honored to be asked to do this. But before that phone call was over, when he was done telling me what I needed to do, and I was happy to do it, like I said, I asked Mr. Dart if he would do me a favor while he was in Alaska, and that was to meet with the Japanese general manager of Alyeska Resort at the time, and see if he couldn't help me smooth the way so we could build our adaptive ski school. And all he said was set it up, set up the meeting, and he'd be glad to do that for me. A month went by or so, and then I went and picked up Mr. Dart and his wife at the airport, and I had to get him into my beat up old Volkswagen Rabbit and put his wheelchair in the back of my car, and we proceeded to go around Alaska, just with all these things that I had set up with interviews and disability advocate meetings, and we did all these things. And at the end of those 3 days, I took Mr. Dart and his wife Yoshiko down to Alyeska Resort, and Alyeska's offices were not accessible at the time, so I'm an amputee and missing my foot, and that's kind of why I got involved in this business to begin with, being a disability advocate. So I'm pulling Mr. Dart up the stairs backwards into the offices of down at Alyeska, and we went into this meeting with the Japanese general manager, who didn't speak a lot of English. He spoke some English, but I think there was a kind of a language barrier going on. So having Yoshiko Dart, wonderful person, helping to interpret the meeting was great. And I'm expecting a long, involved kind of, let's lay out all the facts and present, my case again to the gentleman, but with Mr. Dart. But I introduced Justin Dart to the Japanese general manager, and I said, Justin Dart comes from the office of the President of the United States, and he's here in Alaska, and he wants to talk to you as well about the need for people with disabilities to be able to ski and recreate on the slopes of Alyeska. And the meeting went so fast, I couldn't believe it. It literally lasted about 5 minutes only, and Mr. Dart presented it kind of this way. He goes, "We think it's a very good idea." We, meaning the President of the United States and the administration at the time of George Bush, that you provide this land for Challenge Alaska to build its adaptive ski school. And you could just see the manager's face, just like, oh my goodness. This guy says he comes from the, basically the representing the United States government. And, about a month afterwards, we had a lease deal with Alyeska Resort, and then spent several years building the facility down there. But I could thank Justin and Yoshiko for their assistance in helping smooth the way for that. And then, so it was a great opportunity. Not only to be there when the ADA, a year before the ADA was passed, and be part of that here in Alaska, but the outcome for Alaska and getting our adaptive ski program as a result of that meeting was great. It was a great secondary benefit of that.
Wow. Um, I've said this before and I'll say it again. That's a great story. And you actually answered my next question, which was why the disability cause was so important to you. Because of your uh, amputation, you said? You can still see me, right?
Yeah, now I see you again. It must have just temporarily faded out. It looks like a storm is coming behind me. I don't know if you could see me, but it's pretty dark clouds back here.
Oh, I see the storm, and I think that'll be great quality for my. It is still recording, so we're good there.
Okay, good.
But you
So
answered.
what?
Go on.
Go ahead.
You answered most of my questions, so I guess I should just do the outro.
Well, actually, I wanted to say one more thing that happened as a result of that. 5 years after the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, I got a call from Yoshiko Dart saying, Patrick, we would like to fly you out to Washington, D.C. for the 5-year celebration of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And both she and Justin Dart basically decided to fly on their own dime all 50 people that were like me, like their guide in each state, to Washington, D.C. for the 5-year celebration of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that was a special honor and a privilege, and I really enjoyed that. There was an opportunity to meet many, many disability advocates that were in Congress, including Senators Tom Harkin and Ted Kennedy and Senator Bob Dole and a bunch of other folks that were there at that 5-year celebration. So that was kind of an afterthought or a thing that happened afterwards. But he really inspired me to continue on this disability advocacy path. And he always, his words and immortal words were lead on, lead on. He was always trying to encourage the young people, disability advocates, to lead on. And I've done that. And I hope other people take heart in the fact that we've had 30 Americans with Disabilities Act. There's still, discrimination against people with disabilities, but the ADA has certainly made things more accessible and open for people across the country. We got a long ways to go when it comes to employment. People with disabilities are underemployed. Always an issue that's important and dear to my heart. And I've worked many years on that issue as well. But I hope other people just carry on that spirit of the Americans with Disabilities Act and lead on, as Justin Dart would say.
Of course, lead on. Inspiring words. And I guess my last question is if you have anything else to add, like any other cool stories related to your time in disability services.
Well, I have a lot of stories, Logan, but I really wanted to tell the one about with the Americans with Disabilities Act back in the very beginning. I know that Alaska has generated a lot of really awesome advocates over the years. I'm retired, but I'm not out of the business per se, so I'm still involved in a lot of disability groups. People can get involved in the Governor's Council on Disabilities and Special Education, the State Independent Living Council. They're always looking for new members and young members and new blood to help kind of carry the torch forward. So I just hope people are encouraged by the fact that we have such an accessible country, but we still have a ways to go.
Of course. Well, Patrick, I do appreciate having you here. And before I go, like usual, I need to say to my viewers that if you want to be featured on the next episode and have something related to this topic to tell, or stories to tell, please contact me at comicdude456@gmail.com to set up an interview. And thanks for being here, Patrick.
Yeah, you bet. And happy to do it. And I hope, wish you all the success in your new podcast.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.